Hello and welcome to the Green Profit Academy Pros podcast. This show digs into the challenges in growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit. I'm Christeen Era.
And I'm Steve Bousquet. We are the green industry experts in profit, growth, and leadership. Hello, Christeen. How are you?
I am doing good. How are you today, Steve?
I'm good. It's nice and sunny here today. We're almost in fall. The weekend's coming fast.
Yep, we will be in fall by the time people are listening to this episode.
They will. A lot of birthdays coming up this fall for our families.
Yep, families, team members. We have, some team members that just had a birthday that will be having a birthday, family members. Yeah.
My mother-in-law is going to be turning 90, celebrating her 90th birthday. That's amazing.
That is definitely something to be excited about.
Pretty exciting. Today, we're going to be talking about triangulation and understanding what that triangulation means and navigating interpersonal dynamics in the workplace.
Yeah, this is something I learned about many years ago, and it was a game changer in my business. It was a game changer for me in my personal relationships, and also as a leader. Like, just understanding this concept changed so much of just my awareness of kind of like what was happening. If this happens, what do you do? All of that. And when the thing about this is when it does happen, it creates so much chaos, whether in a relationship or in team dynamics. And it's kind of like this sneaky thing that is just kind of invisible, and it's going around and is creating all these problems. And then we don't really know about it till it's all over and it's, wreaked all this havoc in the business. So I think it's an important topic that we're going to dive into and explain like what's triangulation and how do you deal with it? How do you get in front of it?
So I agree. I think we did it a lot in my company. And one of the goals this year in the company was to reduce this, first create an awareness around it. When we put a name to it, people were like, oh, okay, that's what that's called. It does not feel good. It doesn't sound good. And then when we named it, they were like 100% on board to try to reduce it. And so I would imagine that if you're listening to this, you're going to identify with it. So help us understand more about it.
Yeah. So, and sometimes I need to put this out there. It's not always done intentionally, right? Sometimes like this happens and somebody's just looking for resolve, right? So we can help our team better understand this, and as leaders, better understand what this is. So triangulation is a term that's borrowed from family therapy, where instead of addressing a conflict directly, someone brings a third party into the mix. So think of it like adding, a referee to a game that should just have two players, right? And no referee. So it turns a simple issue into a more complex problem and often leaves the original problem, still in existence. So it actually doesn't resolve the problem, and it can even make it worse, right? So it's when we're bringing one person into the conversation that doesn't even belong there instead of going to the person and having the conversation directly.
Right. So it's talking about a person to another person about what that person did, but not talking to the person who did the thing. So nothing ever gets addressed or resolved. It just perpetuates it.
Right. Where there's like maybe an upset or a disagreement or something like that. So let me just kind of share an example of what this might look like. So let's say that you're frustrated with a colleague, coworker, because they missed a deadline. Like, we had this project, somebody, they didn't do this.
Timmy,
They
we'll
knew
use a
this was
name.
coming.
Timmy misses the deadline.
Yeah. So Timmy misses the deadline. And, instead of talking to Timmy directly, then you go and vent to your manager. So you
I
go
go
to
to Joe and I said,
yeah.
Joe, Timmy missed his deadline.
Yeah. So you're saying, Timmy missed his deadline. He knew that we were supposed to do this. I'm so mad. It created all this extra work for me. And, whatever it is, right? All the upset gets told to Joe about Timmy and what Timmy did. So now the manager is involved, right? And the issue might not even get back to Timmy at all. So you may not even go and talk to Timmy and say, you know what? You missed this deadline, Timmy. It made a lot of work for me. And I was really stressed out by it. And we had, I don't understand because we had talked about all this stuff and you knew it was coming and this deadline was missed. So instead of that happening, you're going to your manager, Joe, and saying, Timmy did this, Timmy did that, Timmy did this. And you never go to Timmy and tell him how upset you are about the deadline being missed or how it affected you, what problems, so now you're carrying all this Timmy deadline, you know, upset around with you and it's never resolved. So maybe now going forward, you always have an issue with Timmy. Like you don't trust Timmy. Timmy doesn't show up. Oh, Timmy, he's not reliable, that guy, whatever it is and how much it impacted you. There's different ways that it can show up.
And Timmy, then it turns into Timmy always misses every deadline every time. And it could have been the first time, or maybe he missed one 2 years ago, and now he misses the second one. And now there is a little bit of mindset around this because it allows me to be the victim.
Mm-hmm. Right. It can. Right. Or avoid conflict.
Avoid conflict, right?
Yeah.
It can allow, right? It can allow me to avoid conflict, be the victim because be the victim of the circumstance, right? Yep.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here.
There's so
I guess
much.
what I'm getting at.
Yeah. They could be avoiding accountability. Well, I was supposed to be working side by side with Timmy, but I don't feel I work well with others, so I did it myself. Right. So it's like, where are they accountable? So there's a lot of avoidance here. And
Right.
some of it is around awareness. Right. So let's talk about when triangulation shows up. Like, how do we identify it in the workplace? And this could even be relative to, I see this a lot with family. And I think it really resonated with me because it was something that my mom was really good at, to where she would, talk about this person and that person and this person, but never address it with that person. So she was very conflict avoidant. And I saw how it damaged relationships, like with my aunts and, friends and things like that. So it's just, when I learned about this and I learned how it showed up and the impact it could have, it made so much sense to me. So we can identify when the triangulation is happening. We want to look for signs like indirect complaints about people, right? So when a team member always runs to the boss instead of the person they have the problem with, like so-and-so didn't give me access to this and I asked for it a week ago. They didn't do this. I tried to work with that person and they just basically said, like, this is something I'm working on. You go over there. So whatever, like these little complaints or gripes, right, that a team member has. And instead of talking to that person directly, they're talking to you or the boss. So, basically we want to look for that when this shows up, like, when there's a noticeable avoidance of a face-to-face conversation, and it's most likely, they're trying to avoid addressing that issue or addressing that complaint. And it's very hard to, at times, I think, for people to say not to listen, right? Not to be supportive, not to try to be like, oh, I hear you. Yes. Okay. What's going on there? Or even just kind of acknowledge it and send them on their way. And this is where it can go very badly. So when they come to us, any team member or any person in the company, or let's say family member, and they want to complain about something, we need to identify, you know, what are they complaining about? And if this is an issue, they need to bring it to the other person.
So how do you identify that? So if someone's saying, so-and-so showed up to this is a New England thing. They show up to a family event empty-handed, and then they don't help. They didn't lift a finger. And then you're like, and they wait until they leave before they say anything. So as soon as they're out the door, they don't say anything to them, and they don't ask why they didn't. Maybe they came from a funeral, or maybe who knows why they didn't, but they don't ever say, hey, or I saw that you showed up empty-handed, and then you were completely exhausted because you were taking care of a sick family member, and that's why you didn't make anything, and you couldn't really help. They talk as soon as they walk out the door. So then, and it could be at work too, like, so-and-so didn't complete that task, but you don't know that they were helping complete a bigger task, or they had another deadline that was even more important. They didn't finish the marketing budget, but there was this really important job for a really important client that they had to get done. And they finished that. And that was like a, really, really important thing. And the marketing budget was like, it was important, but not that important. It didn't generate any revenue. It could be done anytime, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is I was going to get to that, kind of like how you deal with it when it happens, right? Because you need to know how to deal with it. But one thing I will say on this right now is, when it happens, you need to confront it, right? So if somebody comes to you and they're like, this person didn't, bring this dish, or they didn't, uh, complete this project, or whatever it is, kind of the examples that you shared, is we need to address it right there and say, okay, well, I hear that you're upset about this, and I think it's important you go to this person and talk to them. And this is just we'll get into more detail later. And then you hold them accountable to go talk to that person. Right. So there's an accountability piece to it. And the reason that you want to do this, you want to make sure that they're going and talking to this person and saying, okay, I'll check in with you tomorrow and see if you talk to this person. And if they don't, then you may have to go talk to the person. Right. Because we don't want it to turn into this whole drama fest. And that's exactly what the impact this happens. So when triangulation happens, it can drain the energy, from the focus. It can drain the energy from the person or the team member, or even the problem. So we're basically taking all of that and putting it somewhere else. And then it's more focus on the drama side of it, of what someone didn't do, than what actually needs to get done. Right.
Right.
So we're making something else the problem. And when this happens, it can increase like the stress levels. It's going to hurt morale, efficiency, trust. It turns into more of that, like he said, she said situation, versus what really should have happened, and how did you not making that happen impact me?
And there's a lot of time and energy on the narrative that the people create, instead of just going and talking to the person and finding out what really happened. That's what we're finding out. It's like, why didn't they clean their machine at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And then they like, oh, did you see so-and-so didn't wash his Z-spray today? And it's like, well, did you ask him? Well, no. And it's like, well, why don't you go ask him what happened? So now that we're working on not talking about the person that didn't clean the Z-spray, we ask them, and then they find out why. And they're like, oh, well, that was a lot easier than me creating all these stories or narratives.
Yeah.
It's a lot of energy wasted.
It is a lot of energy. So there's energy wasted on creating like the story, the narrative, the upset. how it's impacting the individual that may have had to pick up the pieces or step in or whatever it is. But there's a lot of energy around the disappointment as well. And one of my favorite sayings from Brené Brown is, the higher the expectation, like the bigger the expectation, the bigger the disappointment, which is so true, right? So there's really, what happened is there's this expectation that didn't get met. Somebody's disappointed and they're going to go around and complain about it, versus going to that person saying, hey, you didn't meet my expectation, or, this didn't happen and it created problems. Or I have, even like, hey, I have, kind of some beef with you that I need to get off my chest. Whatever relationship you have, it needs to be communicated. And this really, the role of a manager or a leader. So whether you're the business owner yourself and people are coming to you, or you even have managers and people are coming to your managers, or you have crew leads and people are coming to your crew leads, this concept is extremely important, because what happens is these people, your leaders, your managers, or even the business owner, they get unintentionally pulled into this triangulation. And then, they end up turning into venting sessions, right? Because typically they don't have the skills to know, oh man, like, how do I handle this? Right. So they don't want to seem disinterested or insensitive to this person. So they end up listening to this venting session, and sometimes it can get worse and worse. So they pulled right into the triangulation trap, right? Like, it's a trap. Don't feed into it if somebody comes complaining to you.
Go back, it's a trap.
Yeah. So then, and some of that, when you're trying to be supportive, can be received by that individual as you're agreeing with them. Right. So now there's this division of, oh, the manager agrees with me, my boss or my colleague agrees with me, they're on my team. So then there's this division, right? So then there becomes sides. So it very easily can turn into this small little beef with someone into this big, huge problem. And then it can feed off of something else, and then something else happens and something else. And then this individual will come back to you and they'll say, oh, and guess what Timmy did this time?
Yes.
And guess what Timmy's doing now? Oh, and I was talking to, Bob, and Bob agrees with me that Timmy just never follows through with his work, or,
Right.
whatever it is.
So how it played out a little bit in my company was somebody would make a mistake and it turned into they always, or this mistake, and it's really impacting my job. So we asked people to start tracking it. And how often was it a trend or an event? And then, like, okay, if it's an event, like, realize the magnitude of the event and call it an event. But if it was a trend, then they would have to go and talk to the person and then work through it together. And it created relationships, actually, not division. But before, they would just complain up and down, and it would never get addressed. And maybe the person didn't even know it was so impactful. So now we have a format for it, and we have a tracking system for it, and it's created awareness around it. And then the other thing that we've learned was people were using it as a distraction for when they were feeling uncomfortable about not meeting their own expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So the old look over there was being used. So we're like, oh, hold on. Let's have a conversation about this. And it was very interesting what was going on. So not about me, but about somebody else. And then it was about me.
Yeah. So instead of moving towards the solution, right, of like, hey, this happened, or this impacted me this way when this happened, or I was upset because, and gaining a deeper understanding of, why did it happen? Instead of making assumptions. The triangulation gets them kind of stuck in this, misunderstanding, conflict, prolonged, resolution, whatever it is. And it can absolutely fan the fire of the conflict or the assumption or whatever it is. So there could be divisions of team members. There could be a team member running around trying to get people to not like a crew lead or a manager because they had their own conflict with them. So and it wasn't ever brought to them saying, hey, I was upset when you scolded me on this because didn't you see that Dave next to me, he had just done the same thing, right? So it's like, and the manager, maybe the crew lead didn't see Dave do what we'll say Timmy did,
Right.
right? So it really can make a situation worse. And I've seen this in companies where, and I've brought it up where I see a lot of it. I'm talking, having coaching conversations or meeting one-on-one with the team when we go to a site visit, and there's a lot of triangulation kind of happening. And I'm like, oh, well, this is interesting. Okay. So then we have, a coaching session on, hey, let's talk about what triangulation and what it is. And when they realize it, they're like, oh, I didn't realize it. That was triangulation and this was triangulation. And they can start, managing it. They can start coaching people around it. They can, really start doing something about it so it's not destructive to the relationships or the culture of the business, or even a distraction from productivity and moving forward.
Yeah. We knew what it sounded like and what it felt like, but we didn't have a name for it. And once we named it, then we could start coming up with some even systems for how to measure and manage it. And I think it was kind of a routine that we did it with certain things. We had triggers that we would use, that we would go and we're like, oh, that's uncomfortable. We don't want to have that difficult conversation. Let's triangulate it. So there was like certain things that would come up. It was just easier to talk about that person than actually deal with what was going on. And working with Clifton Strengths, not realizing that reason it was a trend with that was because that person didn't have the strength to complete or do that task. And now we're like, well, if it's a trend, who do they need on their team?
Yeah.
So that opened up a whole nother opportunity for team members to step forward and be more helpful. And they're like, I can help with that. Matter of fact, I'm dying to help with that. Like, that's my strength. So
Yeah.
let me step in there. And so it's opened up, like literally people have got raises, promotions, job advancement because of their like ability to be able to step up. So it's changed that conversation from that they always, and that tough conversations turned into opportunity.
Lawn and landscape company owners, if you're looking to take your business to the next level, you've got to join me on Thursday, October 10th at the 5th Annual Landscaper Summit. My name's Jack Justice, and I'm the host of the Landscaper Summit and the Landscaper's Guide podcast. And at this full-day virtual workshop, we're going to have incredible speakers from all over the country, including Steve from Green Profit Academy. So you don't want to miss this amazing workshop that's going to help you increase your sales, get better results from your marketing, and ultimately elevate your leadership skills so you can lead your company to where you need to go in 2025. Use the promo code PROFIT10 at landscapersummit.com. Again, use the promo code PROFIT10 at landscapersummit.com.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and you made a great point, because this was something that came up recently on a team where the expectation and the disappointment wasn't being met on both sides in a relationship, right? And they were, interestingly enough, upset about the same thing, but it wasn't being communicated and it wasn't being shared. And this was a long-term relationship in a company. To where some of the disappointment, it tied to the length and the depth of the relationship, not just what was it being met. So when we kind of uncovered this and kind of pulled the string on it, what was interesting was they were upset about the same thing, They wanted the same thing, but they worked differently. And one person had the tools to do what they wanted, but the other person didn't have the tools to execute on what was being asked. So there was a couple gaps there. One, they didn't ask for help and support. The inability to meet the expectation wasn't being communicated, but also the person requesting it as well wasn't digging in and figuring out what's the challenge for you to complete this task. So it really leads back to some coaching conversation and some good leadership techniques where it's not intentional, it's unintentional, and the outcomes can just kind of create this big monster that's walking around the company, and people making assumptions, creating their own stories around it, and just saying, like, this person doesn't care and they're not showing up. And it has nothing to do with that at all. It has to do with they don't have the tools, they don't have the strengths, the conversations aren't being had. So instead of doing something about it, it's just being talked about and not to the right people to resolve the problem.
Right. It's the people that have whichever strength complaining to the people who have the same strength that the people who don't have that other strength it can't do that strength. It's like people who have high consistency asking me to have high consistency and complaining about my low consistency. I don't have consistency at all.
Yeah.
So it's about high executing people complaining about people who have high relationship, or high relationship people complaining about people with high strategic thinking. Why do they have to point out everything that's wrong? That's what high strategic do. That's why they were valuable, 2,000-3,000 years ago, because they kept us alive. They pointed the things out that don't go there. There's a saber-toothed tiger over there. Something's changed in the weather. Get ready. It's going to get cold or it's going to get hot. They kept everybody alive. And the people with the relationships kept the groups together. And the group is what kept the group alive. So we're all important to each other, but it's hard to see that. It's hard to feel that. So, and I think I know the team that you're talking about. And one was relationship and the other one was strategic thinking and executing. And they wanted the same thing, but their strengths were not allowing that communication to happen. And that became a struggle. And once they realized they wanted the same exact thing, they just could not meet there. And I just had a conversation 2 weeks ago with my high executing relationship when I'm all influencing. And I had to ask him, how do you want me to communicate to you? He's like, I need to know the why. I need to know the what. You don't need to tell me how to do it, but what is the goal? What needs to be accomplished and what is the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very important to him for that, and who needs to be involved and when it needs to be done by. So I got my sheet now. I have to hit these marks for him to feel I communicated to him, which is very important. Because before it's like, I don't know, why is he got to know all this information? Why has he got to do that? And I would talk to other people about it instead of just asking him, hey, why do you need to know that? Tell me how to tell you. Tell me how we can talk. Because when you have so much influencing like I do, and he has none in his top 20, we're trying to communicate and it doesn't work. He's all executing in a relationship.
Yeah.
So understanding each other and not talking about each other to other people, but talking to each other about how to talk to each other creates a whole different relationship.
Yeah. Or support each other, or what's the problem, what was misunderstood, what, wasn't met. So one of the techniques to address triangulation is it's, about communication. We call it coaching opportunities, right? So if someone shows up and they want to vent about something, we want to guide that conversation with them towards a solution, right? So we can ask some powerful questions, and these are just some basic ones where you can say something like, I hear that you're having a challenge, with that you had a challenge with Timmy, or that you're upset with Timmy that he missed the deadline. What do you think is the best way to address this? So they automatically know that, yes, you're listening to them, but you're automatically inviting them to a solution. What is the best way to address this disappointment or, this missed deadline with Timmy. Another one is, how might you approach Timmy about this? Have you talked to Timmy? How might you go and talk to Timmy? Talk to me about that. So we want to coach them through how they're, and know automatically, all right, so you're going to resolve this. We're not just venting here, but you're not directly saying that. And we're going to figure out a solution together. And then you can go back and say, okay, so now that we know, what the best way to address this with Timmy is I want you to go to Timmy. And tomorrow morning when we get back in, I want you to come and tell me how the conversation went with Timmy. I'd like for you to share how you feel, that you were upset, that you don't understand, whatever it is, like help them find some identifying words that aren't blame words, but you were upset, you were overwhelmed when Timmy, you missed this deadline, and I was surprised because typically this isn't how, you don't miss deadlines, Timmy, so I don't understand. So maybe give them some words to share until they get better at this. So, that's one way, is a coaching conversation, asking them some questions about how to address it. So solution focused questions. So then you have something to hold them accountable on going and addressing whatever it is that they're venting about.
And we say this on almost every podcast. A lot of this stuff is when you first start to do it, it's going to be uncomfortable. We're not going to be good at it, but the more you do it, the more practice we have at it, the better you're going to get. And again, practice maybe before it becomes an issue or a challenge, right? Maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to go practice this with someone. Maybe you practice at home. Maybe you practice at work. Pick someone and say, hey, this is an issue or a challenge that, maybe you pick a practice topic. Maybe it's not real yet. And you say, this is something that came up and I want to talk to you about it. So it's not like when it actually counts, when Timmy actually did miss the deadline, you're not, when it doesn't count as much, you're ready when it actually does count, right? It's the rehearsal. And that way you're ready because it's going to happen. This is always going to happen. We didn't realize how much of it was going on and how much of it was actually driven by the managers. And so we as managers really had to be very careful about what we were going to do. And we had to stop it when we saw it, and we had to stop ourselves. And there had to be a lot more direct conversations with people. And when do you have time? I don't have time to go talk to all these people. But we had time not to talk to them. But we found that actually shortened them. We had time to talk about them. We found it shortens everything, actually. That the life cycle of every issue and every challenge and problem got 80% shorter because we could resolve things and move forward faster because we were just talking to them. And the other thing was, it was that narrative we were creating. They're not doing this, or they missed the deadline because of this. And we found out, majority of the time there was other things that were involved. Like the deadline was missed because somebody changed something at the last minute. And they were waiting for information, and they did not want to turn it in incomplete or something that was not going to serve the goal or mission that they were working towards. And so maybe they didn't let someone else know. They should have let someone else know, but they were this close to finishing, or whatever the information is. So communicating that is also very helpful. So practice with this. It's very helpful in the family. It's one of those things that is way quicker too. And you don't have to deal with all the emotional milieu that happens in families when you're not communicating.
Yes. Yeah. And I have implemented this in my family where, I brought my kids together and my husband, and I said, look, let's talk about triangulation. This is what it is. So if one of you all come to me and start complaining about the other, be ready for me to send you on your way to go talk to that person. So if you're not ready to go talk to that person about it, and if you need support, I will support you in how to talk to that person. But if you're not ready, do not bring it to me. Because, it was like time and time again where so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that and so-and-so's laundry and so-and-so, and I'm just like, do I look like I have, complaint box on my forehead? Because, so that was one of the things that I let them know. Hey, if you're going to come to me and vent about something, be ready to go confront that person and whatever issue you have about it, because you are going to talk about it. And if you don't, then I'm going to talk about it with everybody. So I let them know, that this was going to happen. So really what we're trying to do as leaders is we're trying to shift the focus from the problem to the solution. And we're not trying to ignore the issue, right? Because people are going to have issues, they're going to have challenges. But what we're really trying to do is we're trying to redirect all that energy or that upset or whatever it is about that issue towards fixing the problem. So we're converting that negative, energy and time into positive just by being solution focused and saying, hey, let's bring this to the right person and let's figure out how we're going to do that. Let's figure out how you can talk to them. What would you like to share? How are you feeling? Whatever that is, and then hold them accountable, for that solution. And we don't want to feed them the solutions. That's something else I add. We don't want to tell them what to do. We want to first ask them, what is it that you want to happen? How can you bring this to this person? What's important about this that you need to share with this person? So directing them, with questions to where they find their own solution or their own approach. We don't want to give them the solution to solve this conflict.
No, you want, because it's a skill they can learn. They're going to have these conversations through their whole life. This isn't something that's going to happen today and it's going to be resolved for the rest of your life at work and at home. So teaching them these coaching techniques, these communication skills, is going to serve them for years and years. And the reason we're sharing these examples and sharing the stories about how we're implementing it in our lives is because it's impacted us in a really powerful way, in a really positive way. And, I think I have more authentic relationships now, with less stress. So when I have these conversations both at work and at home, it's not so, the conflict is not there.
Yeah.
Everything just feels, I don't know, cleaner, easier. It's like, yeah, we're going to talk about something that would have been like, I would have chewed on it for 2 weeks.
Right.
And now I just can say, hey, this happened, and this is what I'm noticing. And like, oh yeah, and by the way, this is why. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Instead of me gnawing on it for 2 weeks.
Yeah. And we want to be open and supportive, right? Because as leaders, we want people to come to us with their problems and challenges. They can be very insightful on what's happening with the business. If things aren't, going as planned or as they should, or if people are dropping the ball, right? It's going to help us understand what's going on. But we need to create like that safe and supported space for them to come and communicate with us and express their challenges and frustration. And we want to listen to them without taking sides. So you never want to take the sides of like, oh yeah, they shouldn't have done that. Or I talked to them last week about that. So they're still doing it. We don't want to feed the fire. We want to listen, be neutral, and then work on a plan so they can go address this directly with that person and really identify, like what outcome do you want? What does success look like for you in this situation? What do you want to achieve? What's your game plan? How can you go talk to this person? What do you want to share your challenges are? So we're asking questions for them to come up with the solution and an action plan to then go talk to that person. And once that they have that action plan in place, and they might even need to take notes depending on if they've experienced this before, they might not feel so confident about doing something like that, which is fine. We want to make sure that they're communicating the desired outcomes. That's important. Like, what do you want? And then also supporting them to gain that confidence in resolving this problem themselves. And we talked about this recently on a podcast where in this book, Nurture Shock, which I thought was really interesting, having 3 kids who are completely different and they're all different when it comes to conflict, is in a lot of the content that they watch through their generations is it's conflict, 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 right? For 25 minutes and then 5 minutes of resolve, right? To where all of a sudden it happens so quickly and so easily that everything's perfect and they're friends again and there's no problem. So there's not a lot of techniques that they experienced or observed that showed them how to resolve this conflict. So this triangulation may not be intentional. It's they don't have the skills and the tools to go resolve it and to share the challenge or whatever it is, their feelings or upset that has to do with the person.
So, do you want to give a couple of examples of triangulation in the workplace?
Yeah. So one is, let's say Jane is frustrated with John because John didn't communicate on a project, right? So instead of Jane going and talking to John, she vents to Emily, who's her supervisor. So let's look at, kind of like how Emily could handle Jane's situation with John. So Emily could listen without choosing sides. Then Emily could ask Jane some open-ended questions like, what outcome are you hoping for by resolving this with John? What steps do you think that you can take to go talk to John? So these are just some simple questions. And by Emily doing this, she's then encouraging Jane to approach John directly, leading to improved relationship, better communication, and also collaboration on resolving this upset that Jane has had or her frustration that she has with John. So John has some a part in it, right? He has the opportunity to make it right with Jane, or even Jane to gain some more understanding about whatever frustrated her or John did or didn't do, right? That frustrated her.
So, I'm thinking sometimes we can become too friendly at work sometimes, or we've worked together for too long. And that can kind of be a little bit of a barricade to have these tough conversations about this. Or sometimes we can become too friendly in our conversations. And in that, we have long-term employees and we triangulate stories about someone else instead of just going to talk to that person. And that's where we've really had to be careful. Like, stop the stories and stop bringing up past things. Like, remember when they did that 8 years ago? And that's become their bio, and like, stop talking about, they've changed, they've improved. So really being careful not to bring up, where they used to be, and focus on where they are now and what they're working towards, even ourselves, right? Making sure that we've all developed, we've all grown, we've all, improved, making sure that we're giving people credit for that. So
And
wrapping up. Oh,
we've
go
all
ahead.
been guilty of it,
Yes.
right? It's like,
Mhm.
and that's why I say it's not, it's most of the time, it's not intentional, right? There's something uncomfortable about going and talking to a person that we have some upset with or frustration with or something like that. So, that's something I think just to acknowledge, like, we've all done it in one way or another, to acknowledge that, people are doing their best and they might not have the tools or, the understanding on how to resolve this or what this looks like. So if we help our team understand this concept and give them some tools to address it properly, it's really going to help them grow. It's going to increase their communication skills, their emotional intelligence. They're going to be more solution focused. They're going to collaborate. I mean, the results are just endless, these possibilities, just by kind of sharing this one technique in a company and with our team and making them aware of it, because most likely they're very unaware. I was very unaware. My team was very unaware.
Yeah, I definitely was unaware of how unhealthy it was and how it really could break down. It really lives in that judger path on the choice map. And it can really, for me, it really puts in that why bother kind of mindset. And I think that doing the work on the choice map and wanting to live in learner mindset, there's not a lot of room for triangulation in learner mindset, because we're like thinking, what do I want, what do they want, what's best to do now, what's possible, and though that mindset doesn't allow a lot of room for the triangulation.
Yes, completely agree.
So to sum it up, triangulation can be sneaky. It can be a disruptor in our work lives and at home, but we have to, the first step is to be aware of it, and we can manage it. And as leaders, we need to promote it to our team and the challenges of it, because we need to share it and help our team with coaching tools and really get it into the culture of our company.
Yeah, and there's a few coaching questions that we asked, today and in these examples. So I would just encourage you, like, practice these, be curious, don't buy into, taking sides, listen, ask them, how they're going to resolve it, what's the plan, and then hold them accountable. Okay, so go talk to so-and-so, and I'm going to check in with you tomorrow, and make sure that they talk to that person. So
Right.
ensuring that, you're leading them to the solution, solving the problem, and, addressing whatever it is directly with that individual instead of getting caught in the middle.
And then as you encourage them to go talk to them, and it happens a few times, eventually they'll understand that they'll just go talk to the person.
Yeah.
And some people will do it quicker than other people. Some people you'll have to always remind them to go talk to the person. Other people you only have to remind them once or twice. And then there'll be, other people that will do it sometimes, and sometimes you'll have to remind them. So that's just remember that we're always coaching and helping our people to live better at work and in their personal lives. So thank you for joining us on today's episode. If you found this helpful, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the podcast. We appreciate that. And if you enjoyed today's episode and our podcast, we'd like to remind you and invite you to our Mind Your Own Business retreat that we have coming up in November. At this retreat, we're going to be exploring leadership. We're going to have leadership tools and challenges, or address the challenges that you're going to be facing, every day in your business. And we're going to be giving you time at the retreat and space to work on your business, connect with other business owners and other emerging leaders. It's just a great place to spend time working on your business. That's a term we hear often, and this is the time to do that. So enrollment is limited and will be closing soon. So we're going to have the link in the show notes. Check that out. We'd love to see you there. So thank you for joining us on this podcast, and we look forward to you joining us on the next podcast. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast,
The show that digs into the challenges of growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit.